prior to starting with Air Canada, I got a job in my uncle's bookstore in Saskatoon, and I went out there at the ripe old age of 18, and I took journalism at the university, and I worked evenings in the bookstore and Saturdays in the bookstore, and probably half of Sundays also in the bookstore to pay my way. And at the end of that semester, I needed more money in order to get back home to Montreal, and I went up Second Avenue in Saskatoon, and I walked by a company called A&A Aluminum, and they had a help wanted or salesman wanted sign out front, and I went in, and the owner of the business had a cast right up his leg and right up to his hip. He'd fallen off a scaffold when he was inspecting a job, and he could no longer go out and sell. He said, "I can't hire you unless you've got sales experience." He said, "But here, read this sheet on what we do, and if you could go out and make a sale here, sell someone siding in the next 3 days," he said, "you've got a job." So I read the little sheet, and I walked around the block, and immediately behind his shop there was a guy out who was scraping and peeling the paint off of his wooden siding, and I walked up to him and I gave him the pitch that I had just learned about the benefits of aluminum siding. So as a result, I went back around with an order for aluminum siding, all within about 2 hours. I got the job, and he gave me his Oldsmobile 98 car, which was about 25 feet long, and in the back of the car was a 16 millimeter projector and one reel, and the reel was the story of aluminum, starring Alan Ladd. So one of my first jobs was to visit an old farmhouse sitting up on a hill, and with siding that hadn't been painted for 50 years. I went up there, I measured the house, I encouraged them to watch the movie starring Alan Ladd and invite all of their neighbors. They ordered their siding right there on the spot, as did the neighbors. I crisscrossed the province. I sold a ton of siding, and it was all thanks to Alan Ladd walking and talking in front of a pool, and behind him was a house clad with aluminum siding. I related that story years later when I worked as production manager for David Ladd on a picture called A Guy Thing, and Alan Ladd Jr. on a picture called Unfinished Life. Great story. Alan Ladd gave me my start. I went back to Montreal, and I got a job with Investors Syndicate, selling mutual funds. After that, I was the youngest salesman for Investors Syndicate in Montreal at that time. Again, I was still only 18, and I had to, they had to sign the agreements for me, but I felt I had my calling. In Montreal, from the age of 11, I was paddling racing canoes for Cartierville Boating Club, and So when I got out to the set on Bowen Island, when I wasn't working, driving or props or lighting, I was standing there coincidentally with the producer George Brown, who is from Britain, and he was watching Oliver Reed, our lead, who was supposed to be a trapper, paddle a canoe in circles. I told him I'm a paddler. I paddle competitively, and he said, "Can you try to teach him how to paddle in a straight line?" I said, "Yes, sir." So I went down and I tried to teach him, but he still didn't look like a trapper. And so the producer said, "Well, there's one better trick than that. We'll dress you up as Oliver Reed, as the trapper, and you paddle the canoe in a straight line into the beach. That's all we ask." And then that grew into getting a permit for a double, a stunt double in that case. Also as a permit paddling up the little river to the location in north of Pemberton, which was then classed as a stunt. And between me and Dinty Moore, who did the whitewater stuff, besides me doing that, we covered off all the paddling that our star Oliver Reed was required to do. In that particular year, we had no pictures in Vancouver, and we were relying on Alberta pictures, one of which at the time was Mustang Country that was going to be shooting in Alberta. And we were setting up a grid at Panorama Studios at the time. And I'd let Al Clapp know at Global BC that our plight was that we had 0 pictures, and what we needed in British Columbia was a film commissioner. Al grabbed the opportunity. He was around that afternoon with a handheld camera. He interviewed me. I told him that Robert Altman was prepping to do a movie called Buffalo Bill and the Indians outside of Calgary. He then recorded me. He then flew over to Calgary. He recorded Robert Altman and got him to expound on the benefits of having a film commissioner. Then he went up to Edmonton and spoke to the Alberta legislature. Then he flew back to Vancouver with his 16 millimeter film, and he edited it to show to the BC legislature. We flew over to Victoria, showed it to them, and they were quite impressed. At that meeting happened to be Grace McCarthy, and she then picked up the banner and ran with it. And in 3 years, we had a film commissioner for British Columbia. The first film commissioner was a political insider who filled the roles and went to LA, but he didn't speak the language. And so consequently, Grace McCarthy, who is a friend of ours at any rate, Grace took it upon herself to replace him with someone from the industry, and they had, and Justice applied for the job. She went to Penticton at the time. Justice was working as a lamp operator on a movie called Orchard Children, and she appointed him right on the spot. And he became, in I believe October of that year, he became our first insider film commissioner for British Columbia. when I became business representative for IATSE Local 891, and coincidentally for IATSE 667, their Western representative, I found that with my meager budget, going back to Toronto to meet people and have take advantage of opportunities, and even LA for that matter, I found that very quickly that the Banff Television Festival had all of those people converging on Banff every June. So I made it my point to go there as a representative for the IATSE locals, and then I got to meet everyone in the industry, including Bill Marsden, the film commissioner, and Les Kimber was a big part in the motion picture business in Alberta. I met all of the producers from Eastern Canada, out of Toronto and Montreal, and a lot of the awards were going to people from Los Angeles. And because part of my job was to get into the studios and promote our services in LA, I was more easily able to get through the doors in the studios and networks at the time. So I began to fill a position as a board member of the Banff Television Foundation, and people like Ed Asner, for instance, when he was getting an award, I went to LA. He was doing a picture called Bronx Zoo. He was on the lot at the studio. I could get right through on the lot with no problem, and I sat down with Ed, and he was thrilled to be asked. It turned out that he had a big union background. He was, and so he came with a very professional reel that he played for the Banff Television Festival, and he was excellent. Besides, Peter Ustinov was another one who we'd seen in many, many movies. He got an award of excellence. I called on him and encouraged him to come up to Banff and get his award. Gregory Peck was another one. They went on and on and on, and it was a perfect position belonging to the Banff Television Festival for the 13 years that I was involved.